It's no secret that I've got something of a love affair with the Halo games. I've spent literal hours of my life ejaculating over everything I love about the franchise, and plenty more time slating Halo 5. But needless to say, by the late 2010s, the franchise was in trouble. There hadn't been a widely appealing game in over a decade. Small trailers and screenshots were slowly released to the public, confirming the existence of a sixth instalment in the main canon. But cometh the hour, cometh the man. The 2020 Xbox Games event would finally reveal the much anticipated entry, and, well, much to the concern of pretty much everyone watching, the game was scheduled for release in just months after reveal, which led to some speculation about the state in which it was in. But mere days after the showcase, a statement from the studio announced the game would be delayed until 2021, and here we are, the post-release of Halo Infinite. And the real question is, was it worth the delay? It certainly was. Bringing an experience familiar yet fresh and delving into the open world genre, Halo Infinite is the most ambitious outing for the Master Chief to date. But is it actually any good? I'm going to get into the highs and the lows, the yeses and the nos, and conclude if it's the triumphant return to form we've been waiting for. I'd usually start these reviews by dissecting the plot in detail, but I'm not going to do that for this one. I'm going to stay pretty light on spoilers, as I'd encourage people to play it for themselves, but I will brush over it for context. We're introduced in the middle of a battle on board the Infinity, which ends with the Chief getting knocked out and left in space for 6 months to be rescued by Brohammer. After awakening, the Chief detects something on the partially damaged ring they drifted into and insists that the duo make landfall to investigate, but Brohammer is reluctant as he just wants to return to his family. But being the Chief, he makes the pair go anyway. It turns out that this signal is Cortuna, known as the Weapon, so this begins the story arc of Cortuna discovering who she is and what her actual purpose is. At the same time, a bunch of Covenant separatists known as the Banished have a newly appointed leader, and they are intent on using the ring for malicious purposes. And of course, the Master Chief must stop them. This is basically the three main story arcs of the game, and honestly I'm impressed with what they managed to do with it. I think there's a few shortcomings here and there, but I'm willing to overlook some of these, as fixing the canon that was Halo 5's story was no easy feat. But other than that, there's just enough twists and turns to keep you invested, and plenty of reveals you definitely won't expect, especially about Cortuna herself. This is definitely the closest the series has come to being the grand, world-building and interesting story since the original trilogy, and I imagine it will only get better over time. One thing worth mentioning is that the events of Halo 5 are barely mentioned at all. The only real continuation is the Chief pursuing Cortana, and there is none of the characters from Halo 5 at all, which to be honest I don't think anyone is going to be particularly upset about. So I guess I should speak about the cast of characters. I like the fact how at the beginning Cortana is kind of awkward when interacting with anyone, almost as if she's not used to speaking to people. She'll often point out the obvious and generally not understand basic human interaction. This becomes less apparent as the story goes on, as the Chief and herself get used to each other. The main villain, whose name I can't pronounce, is possibly the best antagonist to date. He's given a build-up and is certainly a commanding presence. 343 played just about every trick in the book to make him the kind of villain you definitely wouldn't want to fuck with. He's huge and powerful, and he'll only use his power of command to serve a higher purpose, or to intimidate his opponents. Because of this build-up and arc, you feel satisfied when you finally defeat him and foil his plans. One of my biggest complaints with Halo 5 was how the Chief was written, and I can safely say that this is not the case here. It's a return to form with him. He makes one-liners to add comic relief at serious moments, like he did in the old games, and he generally speaks much less, as he was always a man of few words. Not to mention the redesign of his armour, but I'll discuss the art style later. But the biggest star for me is Brohammer himself. He's a classic example of a reluctant hero thrust into an adventure he wasn't prepared for. You begin to learn more about his backstory as the game progresses, and you can't help but feel sympathetic towards his situation. All he wants to do is see his family, after being abandoned in space for seemingly ages. He goes from being a selfish, cynical sidekick who certainly wasn't prepared for the task, to eventually willing to risk everything to help save the day. He's extremely well written and played by a brilliant actor. I could only hope he returns for another outing in the future. That's the main cast out of the way, and there's several smaller details I couldn't help but appreciate. The way enemies interact with the player feels more defined than the previous game. For instance, it'll actually comment when you're reloading and actively taunt you if you flee or get killed. The attention to detail is also impressive. One thing I notice is when you can see straight through the ring to the other side and see nothing but stars, because there'd obviously be no atmosphere. It's minor, but it's full of little things like this that make the game world feel believable and compelling. It'd be wrong of me not to mention the cutscenes. Firstly, you actually hold the weapon you had prior to it beginning, which rarely happened previously, and the cutscenes are all one continuous shot. Once you notice this, you can't help but be enthralled by it. It's almost as if you're actually in the room watching the scenes happen in real time. The sound design and score are both marvellous. They actually recorded every sound effect live and didn't use any stock audio as far as I'm aware. Every weapon has a unique firing sound and you can actually hear gunshots echoing off of mountings nearby. It adds to a level of immersion we'd not really seen before. Like I said, the soundtrack was a highlight. It really felt like it belonged in the game and added to the atmosphere. You could honestly paste it into Combat Evolved and it wouldn't feel out of place. Yeah, some of them are reworks of old classics, but I'm absolutely fine with that. But beyond the sound is the visuals. I wouldn't be alone in saying it's a visual marvel. It looks great considering I was playing the Xbox One version. The lighting and particle effects look simply amazing and really sell the atmosphere of the game, which I guess leads me to the art style. I consider it a greatest hits of all the prior games, taking all the best elements from each entry and culminating to a familiar yet fresh design. Like the Forerunner doors are exactly the same as in 343 Guilty Spark, and it gave me a nostalgia buzz the second I noticed it. But obviously there's more to it than just the visuals and audio. What's the gameplay like? Actually very good. The weapons sandbox is easily the most well-rounded since Halo Reach. Each weapon is satisfying to use and has a beefy firing sound. Ammo capacity is no longer an issue, as you can generally just carry more ammo than you need, and there are several ammo boxes scattered throughout the map you can use to replenish your ammo for each weapon type. But needless to say, the Sentinel Beam is incredibly busted. The abilities introduced, such as the grapple shot and drop shield, add variety to each fight and even tweak your strategy depending on how you wish to proceed. The level design is a return to form with the layout, and you're given creative freedom in how you can accomplish each obstacle. You can be Obi-Wan and get some high ground with a sniper rifle, or you can run in guns a-blazing with a shotgun. You're never prompted to do either. That's what makes it fun and interesting. The same approach won't work for every objective, so sometimes you're forced to adapt last minute, and it feels satisfying when you overcome a tough objective. Every mission feels unique and doesn't feel like a retread of previous ground. Virtually nothing is used more than outside of its scripted sequence, and it gives each level its own memorable moments. Other than mission design, there's plenty of other things that enhance the gameplay. There's a basic yet effective progression system. You gradually unlock abilities that can be upgraded and enhanced to suit your playstyle. You can upgrade them in whatever order you like by finding Spartan cores scattered around the map. Obviously, the better the upgrade, the more expensive it is. You also unlock bases around the map and get points called Valor. And when you have enough, you can call in ordnance, from weapons to flying vehicles. It gives you a reason to do other tasks than the main storyline. I also liked how you progressively unlock the map, kind of like in GTA or Far Cry. The more missions you do, the more area you have to traverse. And it's kind of nice how the further along you go, there'll occasionally be dialogue referencing past missions and what you've accomplished so far. There's also a few minor things I noticed that I thought were welcomed additions. The amount of personalisation you get is appreciated, from FOV sliders to sharpness. It's not really something you get on a lot of console games, so it's a nice touch. Even being allowed to customise the colours of the friend or foe tags were pretty cool. I also found it pretty funny how pretty much all of the loading screen tips are Star Wars references, such as Never Tell Me the Odds or Thunderous Applause. And thank fuck they brought back the flashlight. I mean, it's about time. And the post-credit cutscene will definitely make you wonder. Now, it wouldn't be much of a review without stating the negatives. A big gripe for me is there's no dynamic weather. It's either sunny or sunny. Is it too much to ask to have a little rain or some snow every now and then? I guess the designers didn't want the installation to have inclement weather. I also feel like there's too many boss fights. It's a welcome change of pace, but it gets to the point when you basically expect it. It's literally at the end of every level. The best boss fights in games catch you off guard, so to expect it kind of takes some of the surprise out of it. Not to mention the final boss fight alone. Spoiler alert, skip to this timestamp if you haven't completed the game yet. I found it kind of weird how the main antagonist gets killed off like an hour before the end to get replaced with E.T. for the final showdown. She had virtually no build-up or development, and all of a sudden she's the final boss. Like, really? The Brute Leader was a far more interesting character, as I mentioned earlier, but that's just my take on it. Some of the unlockable abilities are a little lackluster. They all have some use in combat, but I feel the threat detector was kind of useless outside of one or two isolated cases. It's just pretty useless in comparison to being able to rope swing, drop a shield, or turn yourself invisible temporarily. I don't know what could have been in its place, but anything useful would have been nice. Another thing I'd have appreciated is if the map was greyed out where you haven't been. It's very easy to go somewhere you've already been thinking you haven't, purely because there's no real indication. A little annoying to spend 10 minutes travelling to find you've already been there. The loading times are pretty bad, especially the fact you have to sit through one every time you die. I don't know if this is because my console is held together with tape and super glue, but it's still an inconvenience. And finally, easily my biggest complaint is there is no mission replay option. Like, why? It's been in every single entry up to now. I wouldn't really want to start a new game just to find one collectible in an area only accessible in mission, because if you miss a skull or collectible, then I guess you're just shit out of luck. There's a few things I noticed that I wasn't sure if they were pros or cons. A lack of fall damage and timer is a bit of a grey area. On the one hand, it doesn't matter if you bail from a Banshee at the highest altitude, but at the same time, there's no punishment for falling off a cliff if you miss with a grapple shot, so I guess it's your call really. A contentious topic these days is fan service. People are quick to criticise it, and the game is full of it, but honestly, what's wrong with just giving the fans what they want every now and then? I certainly didn't mind it. Finally, there's no co-op campaign. Personally, after playing the game, I don't really think this is a bad thing, because you can certainly tell it was designed as a single player experience. I'm not even sure how co-op would work in honesty. So, to summarise, Halo Infinite is the best the franchise has been in a very long time. It hits all the right notes, but also fails to hit the mark at times. Making the franchise step into the open world genre was a bold one, and honestly, I think they managed to pull it off. It's the game we didn't know we wanted, and I'm glad it exists. But after completing the game, I thought to myself, what now? It's been stated the game will be supported for 10 years, so I'd assume that there'll be no new game in that time. I've seen reports that there is single player DLC in the works, and I'm excited to see where that goes. Possibly new map, characters, and obviously missions. I'd like to see the Arbiter return, and maybe even the Flood at some point down the line. The potential is limitless, and needless to say, it's an exciting time for the franchise. And truly, this is the triumphant return of the King we've all been waiting for. Well, I think that about covers it. Signing off.